Marcus Thiel. I am associate professor in the Department of Politics and International Relations at FIU, and I also direct the EU Jean Monnet Center here at Florida International University. And thank you for coming in. It's a big pleasure. Thanks to the generosity of the European Commission, the European Union, we have today a great 1 hour or less than 1 hour, what is it now, more like 50-minute update on Europe, Latin American relations with a true expert in the field, Dr. Joaquín Roy. So welcome, Dr. Roy. It's a pleasure to have you here. Dr. Joaquín Roy, a few words about him. He's Jean Monnet Professor ad personam of European integration and director of the University of Miami's European Union Center. And he's been a great colleague. He's been sort of also, I wrote my doctoral dissertation with him, and he is a very, very experienced analyst of not only European politics, but also Latin American politics. And of course, being here in the US, he has a quite interesting sort of triangular analytical approach. Dr. Roy received his law degree from the University of Barcelona and his doctorate from Georgetown University. And he has published over 200 academic articles, more than 1,700 columns in magazines and newspapers. And he is the author, editor, or co-editor of over 35 books, among them Cuba, the US and the Helms-Burton Doctrine, Las Relaciones Exteriores de la Unión Europea, the European Union Regional Integration, and more recently in 2015, a new Atlantic community, the EU, the US, and Latin America. So with that being said, thank you again, Dr. Joaquín Roy, for being here with us. It's the next 30 minutes or so, right? 35 minutes. You're going to present and give us a little bit of an overview and update on what's going on between Europe and Latin America. And then hopefully we can open it up for 10, 15 minutes question of answers at the end. So please, if you have any questions, put them in the chat box. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I always hesitate, to let colleagues, to share, some of the small details about my small biography, because always at the end, they miss, that they don't recognize, the degree of the diploma of which I'm most proud, and it took me more time and effort, on top of those degrees. I have a soccer coaching diploma that entitles me, to coach at least a second division team in Spain. Anyway, that's why I always try to go back to Barcelona, because in recent years they changed the coach, very often, not right now, but I have to go back to Miami because I don't get the job anyway. So I would like to just to summarize, what I intend, to share with you, which is a summary of what I've been trying to do, for a number of years in this triangular relationship, the European Union, the United States, and Latin America. And I would like to sort of divide it into, not two topics, but actually what are in a way permanent factors, permanent details that no matter what happens, they stay the same. And then, add, some speculation about the changes anyway, taking into account, the circumstances. In other words, the panorama, okay, now doesn't move.
Can you click? Yeah, it does move. It does move.
Okay.
It's just a little slow. It lags a little bit.
So it would be 3 moments of the relationship of the European Union with Latin America, taking into account the EU as a model, the results, the benefits for the EU and Latin America, the impact of US policies, the nature of Latin American factors, the impact of the COVID, and then finally, the impact of the Ukraine crisis anyway. So the first permanent detail that I would like to stress is why the Latin American integration systems differ from the EU model. And the central question then would be why, in any case, cooperation and integration, the EU comes to the picture all the time, no matter what you do. Why not an example of a working federation? Why not a reasonable, effective international organization? Why most of the experiences, the experiments seem to imitate the EU dimension? Why the EU is sometimes despised, and I would like to stress this, especially before the crisis, internationally and internally. Why is that? And in the concrete Latin American questions, you know, the details would be why the Latin American systems of integration lag so much behind the point of reference of the European Union. Why is it that there is a recurrent contrast, you know, between the official declarations that for the last quarter of a century have vouched to pursue the goal of integration similar to the EU? What Latin American leaders mean, you know, when they declare that the region needs its own model of integration, sidelining the answer. So the answer, you know, is that the main obstacle for mirroring the model of the EU is posed by the unfinished task of consolidating national identity, the production of a unique Latin American species of pensadores. Many times, you know, observers, you know, they actually say, you know, that actually what happened is the appearance of failed states. My personal feeling is that actually what actually failed is the nation, not only the state. The liberal nation, not the ethnic nation, has been the model of in Latin America. Liberal nation, it is very easy to design, but it is expensive. It has to deliver benefits. And then the question is that when a country, you know, went wrong in this, what is missing? What is missing is the four freedoms of integration. What Latin America lacks, it lacks, you know, permanently the mobility of labor, of people going from one country to another. And the lack of the non-existence for a number of years of an expert behind the scene, possibly with the exception of people like Raúl Prebisch. So then the impact in that failing of, you know, is the presence, the over-presence of the presidential figure, the national competition, and finally the US influence. So the EU backing, you know, actually for that is that the EU actually promoted, you know, closed regions, but you know, in Latin America. But the problem has been almost permanently the low trade level. You know, the Latin American countries, you know, they actually trade by themselves and so on. So there are the comparative paradoxes that in Europe has problems, but the model continues to be effective. We've seen that in Europe in the two recent sort of serious problems of the COVID, and now with Ukraine. One of the winners actually is the EU, you know, presenting a solid common front. So that Europe has been successful in presenting, you know, the soft power. Some people have been criticizing, you know, the soft power. Well, you have it, and when it is needed, it works. Europe is actually unique, varied, but the Europeans feel something in common. In Latin America, the national affinity is obvious. No major differences in languages, religions, customs, but the Latin American personality is actually only recognized outside, not internally. So the thing is that historically, in the origin, if Europe was born out of the world experience, Actually, in Latin America, the war, internal war among states, has been very little. So the major difference, is actually the concept of sharing sovereignty is not understood. The perception is that actually produces loss of sovereignty. Integration then produces loss of sovereignty. I've been mentioning, that anecdote, when I saw, a platform in a conference that said, that the people crossing that, could not do it because it's only for press pull only. That is actually not understood in Latin America. The pooling and the absent concept, not a similar word. There is no a similar word actually in Spanish. So the virtual triangle, political will to integrate institutions, juridical structure, is actually converted into a vicious trial. There are two basic obstacles: the overpresent president, the speed towards fast schemes, no common management, no common institutions, and actually all this is substituted most of the time by summits, the symmetry. In Spanish is called cumbritis. So the evolution of those experiments, we know that Mercosur, Andean Community, UNASUR, ALBA, etc. So then the result has been the weakening of Mercosur, the survival of the common agricultural policy, and the endemic problem of poverty and inequality. And then produces analogy to the deepening of integration. I'll repeat, the power of the president, producing neopopulism. So the US model actually has been promoting somehow that, but the ALCA actually failed. There is one major actor that sometimes we really don't know if it works for integration or for non-integration, which is Brazil. So hope for solutions, options, inertia, tabula rasa, I'll learn from the experience. What about the EU model? Okay, the EU model is still there. So best solution, learn from the current solutions. In the EU, reform treaty after treaty. No constitution, no fast track, slow process. But the thing is this, there is no other model of reference on earth. In other words, the EU model is a stick that, if not the model, is at least as a reference. So the world factors on Latin America then would be, the lack of the COVID impact, the lack of integration in Latin America, the concentration on remedies in certain subnational regions, the benefits of the upper levels of the societies. In other words, the only ones that actually benefited, and damage to the lower sectors. In other words, the COVID actually produced more poverty and more inequality, the worsening of social and economic conditions. And on top of this, what the local populations fear, criminality, and then the remedy, migration, which, by the way, then affects the whole continent. What has been then, for example, the Ukraine impact? The Ukraine impact actually has produced some winners and losers in the region. The majority of the Latin American governments, actually, they have denounced Russia, but some, remain silent. And those, depending on how the whole crisis develops, then it pinpoints, the fact that a minority has been, at least until now, and at least verbally, a minority siding for Russia. Nicaragua, Venezuela, Cuba, and then the novelty Brazil siding for Russia or maintain or keeping silence and so on, but we will have to wait until the whole thing develops. Anyway, what have been the consequences? The consequences in case of the collapse of Russian policies. Okay, so then the result has been, and this could become permanent, but let's put it this way, we will have to wait until we see that this crisis becomes an almost permanent crisis or develops into something else, so that the minority of backers, or at least verbal backers of Russia, they'll become isolated. In other words, those are going to be the losers. So a minority of backers for the US, NATO, and the EU would be, and then is what we would have to take into account the special case of Brazil. The other special case, actually, that we'll have to analyze is the case of Mexico. But at least Mexico has a historical precedent of being careful through the application of the so-called Estrada doctrine and so on. But the most spectacular case of perplexity is the case of Brazil. Of course, we also will have to wait until the next election, because if in the next election there is a change of government, what could be considered as sort of an error of siding for the Russia, or at least silencing criticism of Russia, we'll have to wait until the whole crisis develops. So what could be, we could select the consequences for the Latin American integration. Okay, let's put it this way. If the record of Latin American integration, with the development, at least on paper, of those basic experiments of regional integration, Mercosur, Central America, the Andean community, etc. Anyway, we would say, that actually the crisis, is going to have a negative effect on Latin American integration because of many factors, among them the ones that we mentioned, before. Because in each one of the regions, we see some, special countries, that actually would not contribute, to the strengthening of that special region. Like in Central America, you have the endemic, the worst case in Nicaragua, with the permanence, the continuation of a regime that actually have chosen, the most worst case of going to so-called or autocratic left. Anyway, what we'll see also then, what we still will see, is the reinforcement of the presidential powers. This is something that let's not kid ourselves. The presidential power is actually a permanent feature of the Latin American scene. And what then we could see is a conversion of some left experiments in some countries. We don't know, how those are going from the center, from the conservatives, like in the case, of Colombia, like in the case, for example, of Chile, like the case of Argentina. So we really don't know how those systems are going to develop. And let's put it this way: the most we could do is wait. is to wait for at least two, I would say, fundamental results of all these crises. Okay, one, that the crisis could finalize in a rather short term, something that many observers doubt, or if the crisis is going to be converted into something else more serious. If we listen, for example, to some experts, we may be witnessing, one of the few big changes in the history of Europe, and the world. And let's put it this way, and for that, we will have to wait. And the most we could do is what many observers are doing, and among us, when students ask for questions, is to speculate. Okay, but as a summary, is that in the evolution of Latin American integration, as the consequences of the COVID and as the immediate consequences of the crisis, okay, what we may be able to see is the confirmation of some losers, okay? And then we will have to wait and see if there are some winners in that Latin American scene towards some sort of a novel picture of Latin America or Latin American integration. With this, I think is enough, and I'll be glad, to entertain any kind of protests, questions, commentaries.
Great, thank you, appreciate it. And you were perfectly on time. So we have 11:30, so we do have time for discussing, and we're a small group, so hopefully, we can be very interactive about it. I have a couple of questions too that I want to ask you, but there are questions coming in from our audience members. And so let me ask you the first one. You can see them also, Joaquin, if you open the chat box, but I'll ask them verbally. Ernesto Fiuqueto asks how we can explain the EU's lack of interest in Latin America during the last decades, right? And he says, he thinks that opened new business doors, so to say, for the BRIC countries, I guess China, right, who has been much more active in Latin America. In the current context, he says Latin America could have been a great ally in the face of European food and energy needs, and interregional relations are weakened. To what extent, does he ask, does the strengthening of the BRICS countries cause the weakening of Mercosur? And I if I can add to that, I also had this question about sort of what's the health of Mercosur these days, between Brazil and Venezuela, I think is already out of it, right?
Okay, beginning with Mercosur, the most we can do is to confirm the assessment that it is frozen, and it is frozen among other reasons is that the ambivalence of some European powers, France, for example, even Germany, anyway, to close a deal because they've been feeling that their products in Latin America, they compete with their interests, okay? And then the two factors that Brazil has not played, the role that actually would be needed, from the special feature of that country and so on. In the process of reconfiguration of Mercosur, I don't think at this point we could care about that sort of mistake that led into nothing, which was the incorporation of Venezuela. Okay, but then internally, I believe that the most important factor for that is the lack of interest of many of the partners of Mercosur anyway. So For example, if then you have the ambivalence of Brazil, but then you have the non-action of Argentina, and then you have the case of Uruguay that actually said enough. We would prefer, to make a deal with China instead of just following that path. There have been, a project of either converting or expanding the concept of Mercosur with a sort of fusion with the Alliance of the Pacific, formed by some countries that were not members of Mercosur, Peru, Ecuador, even Chile, and so on. But that idea has not been really created. So, when you're talking about the fusion, with the so-called Alliance of the Pacific, actually, people would say, well, what actually is needed is actually a real construction of South America, okay? Which, by the way, that was intended, but for political purposes, and actually done against against a specific country, for example, Mexico, with the foundation of UNASUR, that actually totally collapsed, and then even worse, when it collapsed, even some members, especially Chile, suggested the formation of PROSUR, which an excellent observers actually called, the substitution of a bad project for a worse project. In other words, we are talking about the current crisis, consequences of the COVID, consequences of economic problems, consequences of what, I repeat, what may be one of the few fundamental changes in the world caused, by the Ukraine crisis. That if all this, would have serious, important consequences for the conversion of that overall project of Latin American integration.
Thank you. I think that you answered your question about Mercosur and about the BRICS, particularly China already. So there's another question by Jean Rosenberg. And Jean also refers to something I had an interest in too. Could you please elaborate on the role, the present, as well as the historical role of Brazil? Do you view Brazil as an obstacle to Latin American integration? And if so, why?
Well, historically and recent decades, the role or the work of Brazil has been that if we cannot lead it, we are not interested. In other words, look, the rest of Latin America should recognize that we are different. We are the elephant of Latin America. And if this is not recognized, we cannot play the same role as Paraguay or Uruguay, with all due respect, to those countries. So that's the reason. And then, of course, that would clash, with if you expand this from Latin America to cover the whole continent, with the interest of the United States. That's, for example, why the ALCA, the Free Trade Area of the Americas, actually that was founded here in Miami, some years ago, failed when there was a clash of those two big interests, to lead the whole Western Hemisphere.
Yeah, and it seems to me, sort of as somebody outsider looking in, that Brazil, no matter if you have like somebody like Bolsonaro, right, who's very sort of nationalistic, or somebody like Lula da Silva, who's much more socialist, right? Neither of these two options are really great for Latin American integration, are they?
Exactly. It looks like we or the observers cannot find commonalities in the strategy or purposes of priorities of those, call it, two big branches of political ideology of the Brazilian leaders. That's why, until that is sort of decided, possibly in the next elections, we cannot expect too much.
Great, thank you. And again, thanks for your keeping the questions sending. And also, if you just want to unmute, we're small enough that we can really engage sort of here in a dialogue, right? So please feel free to unmute and just contribute with your comments or questions. If there are no other ones right now, or nobody wants to sort of say something, I have a question to you, actually a couple of questions. But Spain, right? I mean, as a Catalan, Spain has always had sort of, like was responsible, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I always felt like Spain was responsible for the EU's relations to Latin America. So, between COVID and between the Ukraine, has Spain still, because of course Spain was also highly impacted by COVID and Sanchez had to do a lot, right, domestically. Is Spain still looking to Latin America as sort of like the European workhorse for Latin America during COVID in Ukraine? Is this still going on, or?
Yes, because Latin America is considered to be one of the priorities. But actually, the role or the interest of Spain on Latin America and on Latin American integration, has evolved from the heroic times of the political confrontations in Latin America. In other words, right after Spain and Portugal became members of the European Union, it was identified. Okay, so here you have two new members of the European Union that have evolved from dictatorships into democracy. Okay, and led by Spain, and in a minor role by Portugal. And anyway, we would like to show that process, with Latin America, in other words, to contribute with peace and cooperation and of former enemies in the confrontations, for example, most specifically beginning with Central America. And they were successful at that time. In other words, for example, Spain, with the cooperation of the rest of the European Union, actually contributed to the peace of to the making of peace in a couple of 3 or Central American countries, anyway, and actually led by Spain. Actually would have been trying to do the same thing with a totally different scenario, Cuba. Okay, so insisting we are not pressuring for changes right now, in contrast with the United States. We are betting for the future. Okay, but the results have been, we insist. Okay. And let's wait until there are some changes. And for example, Spain has been leading in the setting of the European Union to contrast, with the policy of the embargo. In other words, why? Because we are betting for changes in the future. We don't expect the Cuban regime, to change drastically, and so on. And with the rest of Latin America, the same way. In recent years, a decade ago, a decade and a half ago, anyway, for example, the common historical trend of Spanish migration to Latin America, formed by refugees workers, priests, nuns, and so on, actually were substituted by business people. So all of a sudden, the Spaniards that they would arrive in airports, they would come, with equipped with attachés and being involved in oil companies, electricity, etc. So there was the new, it was called at that time, the new reconquest of Spain. Anyway, but then trying to also be careful, because then in the years of the celebration of the bicentennials of independence in Latin America, the Spanish government actually said, what we are doing is actually playing the role of acompañamiento. In other words, you are celebrating the bicentennial, we are with you, but trying to be extremely careful, because anytime that would happen, actually there would be repercussions and reprisals. Among them, because of the fact, that I mentioned before, Spanish companies participated in sensitive economic areas, electricity, telephone companies, or energy, etc., that would lead, into some sort of a problem. All the time trying to be careful, not to be accused of being the new conquistadores. Okay, so.
Yeah, that's a very good differentiated point. Jean asked another interesting question, and why has there been such a marked geographical different split, sort of, or a geographical cast to Latin American economic integration? Why do we have the Andean countries on one side, right, or the Alliance of the Pacific, and then on the other side of on the Pacific side, on the Atlantic side, we have Mercosur? Why is that the case?
Well, but still, in each of those two, call it blocks, you have big differences. In the Mercosur area, for example, I just mentioned one that it looks like it's definite, which is the betting of Uruguay for making a deal with China and saying, hey, look, we're enough. We are not going to accomplish anything through Mercosur. So let us, play our role. And the leadership that at the end of the game actually plays a big role, the leadership has been saying, look, this thing about sort of super nationality, is not for us. In other words, we really don't think that we are going to accomplish this. Okay, and then if you transfer this to the Pacific, then the problem is going to be that it looks like the minute that then there is some sort of a consensus, then one country goes berserk. Like, for example, right now, we really don't know what is going to happen with Peru. Okay, and then after some years of cooperation between conservatives and so-called socialists, okay, now there is sort of a moderate socialist, coming into power. So it's not easy. It's not easy at all about what to do. In Ecuador, is the same thing. So, in other words, the constant changes in the governments of some of those countries make a project of regional integration, a task, which, by the way, if we transfer this sentiment, this assessment to actually the experience of Europe, it was no different. In other words, the record of European integration, okay, show, that actually was the result of very, very, very difficult arrangements of reconciliation, of exchange of resources and so on. And this is what, by the way, this is what the European Union have been insisting in sharing this with the Latin Americans. Look, we were different. We fought in wars. We had different economic alternatives and so on. And this is the result. I'm going back into one of the first slides and so on. The one historical problem, historical difference is that at the root of the European process was war, and the priority was, some people say that's over. Well, that's over. Until the Ukraine crisis exploded, okay, and that's the difference. But there is no question about it that in the case when analyzing the slow process of integration and cooperation in Latin America, is simply that while at the end of the day, or at the end of the week, or at the end of the year, different governments in Europe agreed on fundamentals. In Latin America, the only agreement among governments is that we are going to defend to death the integration of the territory and the central institution. In other words, the central institution continues to be the presidency. Okay, and the result is this: is that what should be the second fundamental institution, the parliament, is constantly very weak in many of the Latin American countries.
I have one more. Yes. So Gina asks, does the US and China really want to see Latin American integration? So do we really want to encourage Latin American to become more integrated?
Who wants to?
US and China, do they really want to see economically and politically integrated?
Well, let's put it this way. The Latin America that actually has been promoted, and backed by the United States, there is no question about it. It's a system of integration. So then, with the stability of the economy, the stability of the society is very good for businesses. And this is actually the same thing about China. I don't believe, myself, personally, that among the priorities of China in Latin America, are sort of a political intervention. For China, the best of the world is a stable Latin America, a stable Latin America and the rest of the world. This is what you see right now as the opinion, the assessment of many observers on the attitude of China on the Ukrainian crisis. For China, that's not good. In other words, for China, what is needed, is a stable Europe. How stable, we really don't know. But the stability. For the United States, closer to this, there are some, call it endemic or constant problems in Latin America that need to be addressed. In other words, there are two areas, more than political, that actually trigger the alarm in the United States. One is criminality. Criminality producing drugs, producing internal confrontations, and migration. So if you're talking about priorities for the United States, you are not going to find, the regional integration to be at the top of the list. But for those two, criminality, an increase of crime, and the triggering of migration. Let's put it this way. Let's go into, if we would be pressed, to do a ranking of the problems, okay? And this is my personal sort of feeling after many years of traveling in Latin America. In the old times, in my experience, 30, 40 years ago, I would arrive in some capitals and I would go to the hotel, I would, give some lectures, I would interview some journalists and so on. And let's put it this way, try to be normally careful. You would not have the sense of having problems. Now it's different, my friend. For example, and this is just between this small group and yourselves and so on. I've been rejecting giving lectures in certain places organized, by embassies and by some interest, unless they would provide me protection. A car, a well-equipped taxi, and in certain places and so on, simply because there are some places that are becoming, the sort of dangerous. And then the thing is this, is that in some places, the old-time victims were the upper class. In other words, that those were the ones that they would protect themselves, with close communities and so on. Now, crime is actually affecting the low classes, okay, the favelas and so on. This is one of the areas that actually are priorities, for the United States. Among other reasons, is because that actually generates more criminality, special criminality, producing, for example, circumstances like in El Salvador. Okay, so if you're talking about priorities, actually this is one of them.
Thank you. It's not very encouraging, right? But I guess these are some of the impacts of COVID, general political instability.
And going back into the COVID consequences, let's put it this way: the worst affected sectors of the Latin American societies have been, what in Spanish is called los de abajo. In other words, the inhabitants of the favelas and the very poor neighborhoods in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, anyway. I still, for example, in one of my classes, I ask a couple of experts, to define, the concept of poverty. Okay, I don't think that we really understand the concept of poverty, and worse than that, I don't have the figures. This is an area that I'm not an expert anyway, but what are the real dimensions of what is called inequality? Is it true? It must be true, because they must be using statistics, which is why Latin America is being described as being the most unequal region in the world. And then the question is, what are the causes and how to deal with those causes?
And it's kind of sort of right ironic that Europe is probably the most equal region in the world. So we would hope for, continued support of the Europeans for decreasing Latin American inequality and all poverty.
That's why. Let's put it this way. That's why some part of the establishment in Europe have been insisting in that one of the most effective weapons, one of the most effective tools to reduce inequality that existed in Europe. Let's put it this way. Europe went towards, World War II, among other factors, because of inequality. Okay. So that's why, the European Union institutions and programs have been insisting that one of the remedies is through regional integration. Economists actually would give the facts anyway, but let's put it this way: in general terms, the contrast, between the economic circumstances of Latin America 40, 50 years ago, when they started, trying to build regional integration systems like the free trade area programs and so on, is that Europe in the first years of integration actually was showing that the founders of the European Union actually trade among themselves at 60 or 70%. Okay, so if you compare this with some Latin American subregions, actually the trading among subgroups of Latin America, have been historically even less than 10%. Okay, it's very difficult then to build a Latin American system of integration.
Well, I think, yeah, we have to kind of, it's 12 o'clock, and I think you already gave us a great overview and update. And yeah, thank you all for visiting, and particularly Dr. Roy, thank you very much for giving us a great overview. Thanks everyone for also asking questions. Jean, appreciate it, Ernesto, Jennifer, Kirby, Christine. We'll be in touch.
And I'm sorry for the technical difficulties.
No, don't worry. We're kind of sorry. I mean, you know how it is. Sometimes it doesn't always work, technology, right? But I think that was a really great update, and let's just hope it gets better, right? That's the only thing we can hope for. And so with that, I'll be in touch soon with you, and take care, everyone. And don't forget, we have a couple of other events coming up throughout April. Thank you again, Joaquín, Roy. Appreciate it. Take care. Bye. Adios.